Hey up! Right, fear and motorcycling. There is actually a scientific term called motorcyclophobia. Phobia generally means an irrational fear of something. Although even in my lifetime, the meaning of phobia has been subtly changed, and it can mean a lot of things, but it basically means that you're frightened of something, an overwhelming sense of anxiety and worry towards coming across something in particular. Now, I'll try and keep this simple. There's a part in our brain, it's part of the limbic system, called the amygdala. The amygdala's main role is in processing of memory and decision making, also emotional responses, including fear, anxiety, and aggression. It's basically just a little chemical factory sitting underneath the top three layers of the cortex. All vertebrates have an amygdala, whether you be a lizard, a fish, a snake, a bird, a rodent, or a human. And it's thought to be one of the oldest parts of the brain, which means it's actually a very successful organ, because those animals that have it, have survived through natural selection due to its presence. It's a safety mechanism that provokes the fight, flight, or freeze response in most animals. Without a healthy, functioning amygdala, your chances of surviving to an old age are severely compromised. So let's be clear, fear is healthy. Fear is nothing to be ashamed of. It should be embraced and not totally ignored. I mean, look at the dodo bird. It lived on the island of Mauritius probably for hundreds of thousands of years. Nothing really to be frightened of on Mauritius. It had no natural enemies or predators. The dodo is routinely sort of characterised as a stupid bird, but I don't think it was stupidity. I think, the environment that it had evolved in had led to an underdeveloped amygdala. Now, settlers came along in, I think it was the 1600s. That led to the introduction of cats, dogs, rats from the ships, and the end result, because the dodo had no fear, was that 100 years later, it was extinct. So my personal view on motorcyclists and fear is that any good motorcyclist should have a good, healthy respect for fear and use it sensibly to assess risk. Now, I often hear one of these comments in the comments section about people being risk averse or, risk aversion. And that phrase is often used as a term of scorn or criticism. But the decision not to take a risk in any particular situation is a product of the amygdala. It's a chemical response that releases adrenaline and various other chemicals that tells you that the rewards will not outweigh the risk, so don't do it. It's not about being brave or weak and pathetic. It's about a non-reasoning organ in your brain releasing chemicals which lead you to make a decision. So you should never criticise anybody for declining doing something that you would be quite willing to do yourself. Their decision is their decision alone, and it's not for anybody else to try and persuade them otherwise. So that leads us into motorcyclophobia. Now, over the years, and I suspect this will be the same for anybody that's been motorcycling for a long time, I've met a lot of people that are frightened of or don't like motorcycles. And usually, not always, but usually there is a backstory to that, an anecdote that they had a friend or a relative that was killed or seriously injured on a motorcycle. And although, to me and you, people that ride motorcycles and love it, it might seem irrational. It's not irrational to them. It's just a product of the amygdala reacting to either personal experience or social experience, or maybe even social conditioning. Now, on some occasions, in my case, it was girlfriends that I managed to talk into coming as a pillion rider with me. You can reverse that, but in a lot of occasions you can't. I think it would take probably deeper sort of psychological counselling to get to the bottom of that. But, you know, why bother? If they're not into bikes, they're not into bikes, and there's no point forcing it. And that well-known phrase, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, simply doesn't cut it in those situations. You know, the origins of that phrase go back to military settings where obviously people were being forced into something which instinctively the brains didn't want to do. Obviously, in those settings, it's a prerequisite to try and override survival instincts, but that doesn't apply in other walks of life, especially when it comes to a pastime like motorcycling. So that explains the flight aspect of the fight, flight, or freeze reaction to fear. Now, fear itself it sort of exists on a spectrum. It's not a constant, and it exists from a plane of very inobtrusive, barely perceptible, to a state of red alert, the ship's sinking. Now, with a rider that's reached a point of experience and emotional maturity, fear rarely comes into play because they've learned the lessons. They've learned to be cautious, to identify things before they become a problem, before fear is going to kick in. So they rarely find themselves in a situation where fight or freeze come into play. And fight or freeze really only come into play when the mechanism of fear has failed or has been ignored. And actually, I've always thought it's the modern incarnation of fear that often steers people into that situation. I'll try and explain it as best I can. You know, the human brain, going right back to sort of pre-primate days, millions of years ago, has been in a constant state of evolution. It's been constantly improving. But up until, let's say, 200 or maybe 300 years ago, it was necessary in order to physically protect you from harm. We live in very different times now where life is generally very safe. The mechanism of fear evolved in order to protect us from being eaten by wild animals or being put to the sword by some invader. That's all gone now, so the focus of fear has shifted. Our society now is psychologically very complex, and I think a lot of people on motorcycles, believe it or not, those that sort of pretend to be brave or they think they're being brave, they're actually driven by fear, and that is the fear of losing face, not fear of physical harm. Often characterised as ego. Fear has now become the driver of competition, the fear of coming last, the fear of not beating your opponent, the fear of not being able to overtake that vehicle in front of you that's only travelling 5 miles an hour slower than you are, the fear of not being the fastest and the most skillful, the fear of being unable to show what you perceive as superiority. It's an irrational response that, you know, as I say, seasoned riders learn to avoid through experience, because there is one flaw with fear, in that fear can put you in danger. In cognitive development lectures, the example of this that was given to me was an incident where you've been pestered by a stinging insect. In order to avoid that insect from harming you, you swipe it away recklessly with your hand, and in doing so you put your hand through a glass window, causing severe cuts. You've actually caused a more serious injury than the injury that you avoided. Whilst trying to avoid the fear of injury, you actually create a higher incidence of injury. And that's what happens so frequently in motorcycle. Whilst trying to save face, people put themselves into real physical danger, often with tragic consequences. I think the most common example that I hear on this channel in comments, and I get it certainly weekly, if not daily when I put certain videos out, is that people need a very powerful motorcycle in order to get themselves out of trouble. Now, what they've actually done is, because of that fear-driven competition in trying to prove the superiority to other road users or to friends. They take a risky overtaking manoeuvre and find that they're unable to complete it safely. They put themselves in danger. So their solution to that is to have a very powerful motorcycle that can give them extra acceleration to get them out of that danger. In my book, that is a fear-driven behaviour. It's created a fight or freeze reaction. Now, in the case of freeze, it may have been a brief hesitation because they've got themselves in a situation and momentarily they're not sure what to do. It's the classic rabbit caught in headlights scenario. Just like the scenario with the insect and the glass window, the fear of losing face has driven them into a much more dangerous escalation of actual physical harm. So, the freeze or fight response comes in. Usually they choose fight, they use aggression, they need the power to accelerate away from that situation in order to protect themselves. I suppose you could also sort of categorise that as a flight response, in that you're running away from the danger that you've put yourself in. The fear of losing face has escalated to the point of reckless endangerment. Now, the other part of the fight response to fear, I always see fear and aggression as being the same thing. They're both basically the same emotion. It's just the psychological context of that emotion that changes its meaning. Your emotional state changes the way you perceive it. Now, road rage obviously is aggression. Road rage is a fear response. You've been in a situation that, you've been unable to prove your superiority, so it turns into an aggressive exchange. It's a classic situation of escalation where fear escalates and feeds more fear, resulting in some sort of aggressive altercation with another road user. Another road user who has very probably been subject to the same emotions. That's why you've both ended up at that point. And if you've digested what I've said to you so far, you will realise that it is pointless and avoidable. Right, I know a lot of other channels probably have a very different perspective about fear in motorcycling, and I suspect, because I haven't watched any of them, that it's possibly geared up to overcoming fear. My personal view is that is a mistake. You should embrace fear and you should learn lessons from it. It teaches you to be more alert, more preemptive as a rider, and more conversant with evasive and defensive riding techniques. Fear, and knowing when to take notice of fear, is a very valuable tool in any motorcyclist's armour, in my opinion. So embrace fear, listen to it and learn from it. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, hype this video if the hype button is available to you, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. About 80% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. It's totally free of charge. You can unsubscribe at any time. It's a hassle-free process. Now, there are other ways that you can help me out via my Patreon page, PayPal donations, or by use of the super thanks button down below. It's not essential, but once again, it is appreciated and it helps me produce these videos. I am, of course, going to be back next week, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.